What's up, everybody? It's another college football week, and we are getting down to it. First of all, happy Thanksgiving week. I'm Joel Klatt. This is Breaking the Huddle, and this show is brought to you by Dr. Pepper. It is the official drink of Fansville. Lots to get into today. Obviously, I'm going to talk about what the committee did on Tuesday night, putting Ohio State at number 1, LSU coming back to number 2. I'll give you my thoughts on that. I'll give you my thoughts on some teams that I feel like still control their own destiny that you might think like, really? Is that the case? Yes, it is. I'll get into that. As well as my top 10. I will give you my top 10, the reasons for those rankings as I see them right there. We're going to get to the fan interaction. So as always, remember, this show is better when you give me some good snark. So get online at Twitter, at Joel Klatt on Twitter, Joel_Klatt on Instagram. You can follow us here at Fox, at CFP on Fox on Twitter, and give us your feedback, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the show with all of this. If you are a comic book fan, welcome. And yes, I did not really realize I was making a mistake. I knew it sounded really good, and guess what? I'm going to own it, and screw you. So we're going to get to that later in the show, and my performer of the week, and it's going to be a fun time. Here on the week of Thanksgiving, rivalry week. This is one of the best weeks of college football. It's one of the best weeks of football, period. So we're finally here, and some of you are digging out from massive snowstorms right now. So sit down and enjoy it. Maybe get a cup of hot chocolate if you want. I love hot chocolate. Is there sugar and syrup? Yes. Let's get to my top 10. At number 10, I've got the Michigan Wolverines with those 2 losses, but stellar play of late. In their last 18 quarters of football, since the halftime of that Penn State game, what you see is that Michigan is outscoring their opponents 180 to just over 50. Their margin has been terrific. And this is a really good football team playing their best football at the right time as they get ready to take on the Ohio State Buckeyes. I know that this is higher than what the committee has, and the committee certainly has more respect for the head-to-head matchup, specifically against Wisconsin and Penn State, than maybe I do. But I take this on current form, and current form takes precedent over what I saw in week 4 of the college football season. So from that standpoint, I've got Michigan in my top 10. You can agree, you can disagree, and I'll get into that maybe a little bit later. Actually, specifically, let me just stop right there. The reason I have Michigan ahead of teams that they lost to, namely Wisconsin, is current form. I have been very consistent all season long on trying to evaluate what teams are doing on the field at that moment. I've done that with Clemson during the course of the year. I did that with Ohio State early. I've done that with LSU. I've done it with Alabama. So I want to remain consistent with Michigan. If you look at what Michigan has done in the last 18 quarters, it's been significant. They've been outscoring their opponents by a drastic margin. Meanwhile, Wisconsin has not been nearly as dominant as what they were to begin the year. When they started the year, I think their first 4 or 5 games, I think it was 5 games, they gave up a total of 29 points. And in their last 5 games that they've played, they've given up on average over 25 points. So they're not nearly what they were early in the season from a domination standpoint. And Michigan is getting so much better. Their quarterback, Shea Patterson, has been outstanding. In the last 2 games, he's got 9 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 750 yards passing. So again, current form, I'm going to weigh that more heavily than maybe something that happened way back early in the season, which is why I've got, in my rankings, Michigan just ahead of a team like Wisconsin, which would have come in there right at about 11 for me in the rankings. Okay. So I'm going to go with Baylor at number 9. Baylor, that was a dominant victory over Texas. I was really interested to see what Baylor would do, how they would respond after blowing that lead against Oklahoma the previous week. I mean, that can be a debilitating loss for a team, in particular when you're talking about team chemistry, momentum of the season, confidence, and yet they came right back and they were terrific against Texas. Texas scored a late touchdown to make the score look a little bit better. Rest assured, Baylor dominated that game. And I understand that's not a great win, right? Texas is a 5-loss team at this point. So what did they do against what is now an average team? They dominated them, which they should. Charlie Brewer's been outstanding at the quarterback position. Really excited to see if they can finish this thing off in the regular season and then play Oklahoma in what will be a really good Big 12 championship game. I've got Minnesota at 8. Minnesota just keeps on trucking, you know. And I got to tell you, Tanner Morgan, the quarterback, Johnson and Bateman on the outside as wide receivers. Rashad Bateman has been outstanding. They're really hard to cover. In fact, when I was talking with the Penn State coaches last week, one of the things that they told me about Minnesota is that nobody that we've played to this point, now granted they had not played Ohio State yet, but they said nobody that we've played to this point in the season understood themselves better than Minnesota. And you might be thinking to yourself, like, what does that mean? Well, I think it's actually one of the most important things that you can do from a coaching staff perspective is understand yourself. Know your own identity and play to that identity. I thought it was an incredible compliment that James Franklin and the Penn State staff paid to Minnesota in terms of what P.J. Fleck is doing with the Gophers right now. This is a team that understands who they are. They understand how they have to play in order to win. And part of that is the fact that Tanner Morgan is really good in the RPO game. They've got a couple of wide receivers that are mismatches that have played great football of late. And now they're going to have a chance to play Wisconsin, potentially win the division, and then go on and play for the Big Ten title. This week's Minnesota-Wisconsin game is for the Big Ten West. So that's a championship game there in Minnesota. That's a fabulous story. A couple of years ago, they played with the division on the line, but not nearly as impactful as this season, and here's why. Minnesota controls their own destiny to go to the college football playoff. That might raise some eyebrows, but all you have to do is think about it. They've got a chance to beat a ranked, very quality opponent in Wisconsin this week after taking care of Penn State earlier in the season. Their one loss would be on the road to a really good football team in Iowa that is ranked. And if you give them a win against Wisconsin, and if they knock off the #1 team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes, Minnesota is going to the playoff. I don't think that's controversial at all. Minnesota controls their own destiny for a playoff berth. Kudos to you, P.J. Fleck, for what you have built. You keep rowing that boat up there in Minneapolis, and guess what? That boat has almost arrived into the college football playoff. Minnesota controlling their own destiny. There's not a question in my mind if they beat Ohio State, if they beat Wisconsin, they are going into the playoff as that 4 seed or 3 seed. One of the things you want to keep in mind, if Ohio State were to also beat Michigan this weekend and then maybe lose a close game to Minnesota, both of those teams going, pending what happens in the SEC championship game. But there's a lot of things that need to play out. Everyone just thinks chalk is going to go down. Chalk meaning favorites win. Rarely happens in college football. We're going to see an upset or two here down the stretch. One of those might be Minnesota. So watch out for the Gophers, who I think control their own destiny for a playoff berth. The same cannot be said for Oklahoma. While they have really played gritty, tough-nosed football over the last 4 weeks, winning 4 one-possession games, or excuse me, playing 4 one-possession games over the last 4 weeks, I don't think that you can just say, hey, if they win out, they're going to go to the playoff. They will have an argument, but that's the best that they can provide is an argument. They may be included, pending what happens ahead of them, and they're going to have a pretty substantial resume at that point to potentially get into the playoff, but you cannot say OU controls their own destiny. One of the things I don't want to say nervous, concerned about for OU here moving into these last couple of weeks. 2 things. One is that OU defensively has been hot and cold this year. They have played unbelievable in some games, like the 9-sack performance that we saw in Red River. And then they have been incredibly pedestrian in other games, namely like Kansas State defending the run. If you show up with a Kansas State style of play, if you're OU this week, remember they did not defend the run well against Kansas State. If you don't defend the run well this week, Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State will eat them up. He's one of the best backs in the country. He's explosive. He's leading the country in rushing. So Oklahoma has work to do just to get into that Big 12 championship game with 1 loss. The other concern that I have for Oklahoma this week is the workload in the run game on Jalen Hurts over the last 4 weeks. Okay, folks, he's carrying the football too much. They've got to get it back onto Kennedy Brooks. They've got to allow that run game to take some of the pressure off of Jalen Hurts. One, that'll help open up the passing game because then the RPOs and the play action will actually get the ball down the field. Right now, what you've seen in the last 4 weeks is that Jalen Hurts has set a season high in rushing attempts in every one of those games. 19 against Kansas State. Then he went 22 carries, 27 carries, 28 carries last week. So while he's playing well, and they're winning, and they're still in this thing, I think that's going to need to change. That run game is going to have to come alongside and help him out. So OU, Oklahoma State, and Bedlam, that's going to be a great one there in the Big 12. I've got Georgia at number 6. Georgia offensively has struggled of late. When you look at what they've done over the last, 4 or 5 games, what you'll see is they've got like yards per play. They're down there at like 112th. This is a team that is not scoring like they should or maybe like they'll need to in future weeks against LSU. In fact, over those 4 or 5 games, they're averaging like 21 points a game, which is 100th in the country over that span. So while Georgia has a great defense, and I really think they're a great defense, number 2 in the country in scoring defense just behind the Ohio State Buckeyes, it might take more than just great defense to beat LSU next week. I think you'll take care of Georgia Tech, but then next week will also be a bit of an anomaly from a scheduling standpoint. Did you know next week before the SEC championship game, Georgia will be playing its 6th consecutive week against a Power 5 opponent? That's a long stretch to then all of a sudden have to play against a top 2 team in the country and LSU on a neutral site with a great offense. LSU will not have that streak or stretch of games under their belt when they face Georgia. So that's going to be an interesting one moving forward. Georgia, by the way, controls their own destiny. If they win out, they're going to be in the playoff. And very similar to like Minnesota winning out, if Georgia were to win out, I think LSU also goes. So LSU would probably still punch their ticket as well. I've got Bama at number 5. I think Bama is a really good football team. They're very strong. And everyone assumes that they're not going to throw the ball as well without Tua, and I assume that to some degree as well. But let's see it play out. Remember, we thought that Cardell Jones was not going to be what he turned out to be for Ohio State in 2014, and I'm not suggesting that Mac Jones is going to turn out to be a better version of Tua than Tua was. All I'm saying is he's throwing to incredible wide receivers on the outside. That's going to help him out a lot, and he's going to need that. Remember, Auburn has given up only 250 yards passing to 2 quarterbacks this year, Kellen Mond and Joe Burrow. So Auburn's defense is very difficult to face. This is also a home environment for Auburn that's going to be the most difficult environment that Alabama has seen all season long, and they're going to do that with a backup quarterback. This is where I think that the injury bug starts to catch up with Alabama. Remember, last week against Western Carolina, yes, you heard me correctly, Western Carolina, they had 3 defensive lineman starters out. Henry Ruggs was banged up at the wide receiver position. The health of their team is under scrutiny at this point as they enter into this Iron Bowl week against Auburn. That's going to be a tough game. Watch out for Auburn. Watch out for Oklahoma State. Those teams that are playing at home, in those rivalry games, those are very difficult games. Ohio State's got one of those as well. There we go. There we go. How we doing, Utah? How we doing, Utah? Welcome to the party. Welcome to the party, Utah Utes. People don't want to give Utah a lot of credit, and I understand that. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, you're wrong if you don't have Utah as high as I do them. I understand that I'm rating Utah a little bit higher than others. I understand that. What did I tell you earlier in the show? I'm going to evaluate teams for how they're playing currently. And so while Utah doesn't have the resume, and I understand that, you can parse out what they have done in particular of late, and you can see that Utah is a dominant team at this point, and they're more balanced than you think. Think of it this way. Tyler Huntley is putting together, their quarterback, is putting together the most efficient season at the quarterback position in the conference's history. And that conference, by the way, gave us Andrew Luck and John Elway and Marcus Mariota. Mariota set the conference record for passer efficiency in a single season the year that they went to the national championship game and lost to Ohio State. Tyler Huntley is currently breaking that efficiency mark right now. That's incredible from a team that historically has not played great on the offensive side of the ball. They can also run it with Zach Moss. Zach Moss is a tremendous player, and by the way, he was not in the game for 3 quarters when they lost to USC. Now, what's lost is that USC was playing with their third-string quarterback, so I'm not trying to give them an out. I'm not giving Utah excuses. I am saying that right now you don't want to play Utah. No one wants to play Utah. Why? They got NFL players littering that defense, folks. If you haven't watched Utah play, you're probably asleep because they've played so many times late at night in Pac-12 after dark. That defense has 4, 5, maybe 6 guys that are NFL talents on every single level of that defense. They're really good. Kyle Whittingham last summer told me this is his best defensive front that he's ever had, and he's had some incredible players up there on the defensive front. The last 13 games that Tyler Huntley, their quarterback, and Zach Moss, their running back, have been healthy for all 4 quarters. They've won all 13 of those games. I told you about their recent form. They've won 7 straight games by 29 or more points. That form is really good, folks, and I think Utah, while it's not an automatic, I do believe that if they went out and LSU beats Georgia and Ohio State beats Minnesota, if we see chalk, I expect Utah to be in the playoff. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I think that the committee values Utah. I think that the committee weights those injuries, in particular Moss in that loss to USC. It helps that USC is now ranked. That's not just some nondescript South Carolina team that rolled in and beat Georgia. So these things are going to help Utah, and ultimately we'll see how that comes to fruition down the stretch in the season. I've got LSU at number 3. I know people, I mean, they're aghast. How in the world can you have LSU number 3? Because I can. Because I actually evaluate teams in their entirety. And from a holistic point of view, LSU has many more faults than the 2 teams ahead of them, which is going to be Clemson and Ohio State. And to this point in the season, I don't think it's fair to just talk about one of these teams without also talking about them in comparison to one another. That's the point in the season that we're at. I've got Ohio State 1, Clemson number 2, and LSU number 3. Great teams. They've separated themselves out. I think these teams are the class of college football. I think that it matters a great deal who the number 1 seed is this year because you want to avoid Clemson, who the committee is going to put at 3 with their lack of strength of their overall schedule. So LSU 3, Clemson 2, Ohio State number 1. Let's just go top down. Ohio State, the most fundamentally sound, dominant, complete team in the country. There's no other way around it. Think of it this way. In a top 10 matchup, they turned the ball over 3 times. One of them on the 1-yard line, the other 2 in scoring position for the opposition. It was a 17-point swing with those 3 turnovers, and they still won by double digits. They were this close from blowing the doors off of Penn State. They've got the singular most dominant player in college football and best player in college football in Chase Young. More on that in a second. And they've got an offense that can run the rock. They're powerful. They can throw it to Chris Olave. That's the best team in the country, at least to my estimation. Number 2 would be Clemson. They're incredibly balanced as well. Trevor Lawrence in the last 5-6 games, he's thrown 3 touchdowns in every single one of those. Their defense has been absurdly good. In fact, the only other defense that has been more consistent is Ohio State. They're the only teams in the country that have not allowed an opposition offense to gain more than 300 total yards in any given game. You can't say that about LSU. LSU gave up 400 yards rushing to Ole Miss. They clearly have a hole in their defense. They've clearly separated themselves out from the rest of college football. I can love LSU and then adequately criticize their defense. They're in the 40s in both scoring defense and total defense. We've only seen one national champion since the start of the BCS that did not have a top 25 defense. LSU does not have a top 25 defense. That one team was Cam Newton's Auburn team. So Joe Burrow better be Cam Newton special if LSU wants to go and win the national championship. Is he that special? He might be. I love Joe Burrow. I love LSU. Everyone's like, man, you hate LSU. I love LSU. They're one of the 3 most dominant teams in college football. They've separated themselves out from everybody. They have the single best win in the country. But when I evaluate these teams holistically, I think they're pretty clearly number 3. Their resume is going to put them above Clemson, but their resume alone can't go above Ohio State. They each have 3 ranked wins as the committee sees them, and Ohio State is clearly the more dominant and complete team over LSU. So there's no controversy for me at all with the committee putting Ohio State over LSU, and if Ohio State wins out, they will remain the number 1 team. They will avoid Clemson, who will be number 3, and they will choose where they play their semifinal game, pending on who gets that 4th spot. Now let's go to Ohio State. Let's go to Ohio State, and let's go to the fan reaction, because I told you more on Chase Young in a moment, and when you talk about Chase Young, that's when you got to go to the fan reaction. Chase Young is unbelievable. Folks, as far as the players that I've actually covered in the booth or around college football during my time as an analyst, and I started covering college football in about 2007, he's the most dominant defensive player that I've seen. I saw Ndamukong Suh. I was in the booth for Ndamukong Suh. I covered the Big 12 specifically in Ndamukong Suh's year. He was great. He also popped late. He was dominant in that Big 12 championship game against Texas and Colt McCoy. That's what got everybody talking. Chase Young has been dominant the entire season. In his last 2 games out against top 15 opponents, Wisconsin and Penn State, he's got 7 sacks. What? This dude is like Barry Bonds in 2001 hitting 73 home runs. Why do I call him Barry Bonds? Because Barry Bonds got like 1 or 2 strikes a week to hit, and he hit them both out of the park. That's what Chase Young does. Every time he's singled up in a one-on-one passing blocking situation, he sacks the quarterback, gets there for a strip sack. It's uncanny. He is unbelievable. I'm trying in the booth to sit there and say like, oh, what's the analogy? And I'd been calling him Superman. I've been calling him Superman. And then all of a sudden there's another sack. I can't even remember, maybe Malik Harrison or Jayshon Cornell. And then there's an interception. And I'm like, man, this entire defense, man, this is like Superman. And I'm like, the Avengers. Didn't think anything of it at all, actually. Why? It's pretty obvious. I'm not knee deep in comics. Really at all for my entire life. Although I understand, listen, that's great. If you love comics, that's great. It was an honest mistake, and I got to tell you, people were pissed. How dare you? One's DC and one's Marvel. I don't really care. And guess what, folks? Now it's a thing. Because there's one thing you got to know about me. I'll turn into a mistake now. I will turn right into the wind. Give me a headwind, I'll turn right into it. So guess what's coming in the first quarter this week? Oh, you're damn right. You are damn right. First quarter this week, I am saying Chase Young is Superman and Ohio State are the Avengers. It's coming out. Now all I need is one of you out there to make a shirt, right? Like, I know, trademark and all that. Make the shirt. I mean, I'll wear it. I'll wear it on national television. I'll do it. There's no question in my mind. So Chase Young and the Avengers are coming out in the first quarter against Michigan. There's going to be 15 million people watching, so there's going to be a whole thing again on Twitter. Oh, this analyst on the Michigan-Ohio State game is such an idiot. Oh, my gosh. He doesn't know that the Avengers don't include Superman. Like I care. Oh, and by the way, what's this? What's this? Can we go to right here? So obviously I don't really know what's going on in life in the comic book world, but I can tell you that a few of you brave souls did come to my defense. Because guess what? Apparently there was an allegiance at one time in like 2001, and Superman showed up with the Avengers. So it is Superman and the Avengers. I love life. This is so incredible. Oh, and all the nerds retired to the nerdery and coalesce to form their next argument against that crotchety old analyst that joined up to competing cosmic forces. I don't really care. I really don't. And it's coming. It is coming this week. Okay, more reaction. Oh, here we go. Hey, by the way, I also got a lot of feedback on my thoughts on LSU. LSU, you know, everybody from the SEC is touting like, we've never seen this in the SEC. They've got a 4,000-yard passer, a 1,000-yard rusher, and 2,000-yard receivers. And I'm like, the 2018 Oklahoma Sooners say, hold my beer. They had 2,000-yard rushers. They had another rusher that was 974 yards. They had 2,000-yard receivers, and they had the 4,000-yard quarterback in Kyler Murray, who also was one of the 1,000-yard rushers. Hold my beer, everybody. Hey, by the way, do you remember what we said about their overall conference that they played against when they put up those numbers? Do you remember? Oh, I do. Everyone said the Big 12 defenses are trash. So let's all just step back here and actually have some consistency when evaluating a great offense, which is what LSU's offense is. It is a great offense. I love watching them play. I absolutely love watching Joe Burrow play. This dude is the picture of efficiency. He's going to set the single season completion mark that was set by Colt McCoy in 2008. He's smashing it by 2% right now. Dude's playing amazing. Jamar Chase on the outside. Like, these guys are dudes. I wish I could call an LSU game. I love watching LSU on offense. I really do. Defensively, they could use some work. All right? They could. Now, my point was they have done this year, and nobody criticizes the fact that SEC defenses as a whole are a bit down, which is fine. Which is fine. My whole point is that Oklahoma State did this exact thing in 2017. 4,000, 1,000, and 1,000 as far as receivers. 2018, Oklahoma did this exact thing and took it to another level with the second 1,000-yard rusher. And everyone crushed the conference as a whole for not playing defense. So just have some consistency. I understand. Listen, I'm not saying that the SEC plays as bad of defense as we've seen in the Big 12 over the last couple of years, but I am saying, like, have some consistency, all right? Like, we have seen this before. This whole, like, we've never seen this before. Yes, we have. Oklahoma for 3 straight years has averaged over 8 yards per play. Over 8 yards per play. This year, LSU averages 7.7 yards per play. We saw this last season with Alabama, who averaged 7.7 yards per play in the SEC. So while it's an amazing offense, and I think LSU is a great team, and I can't wait to watch them play in the playoff and in the SEC championship game, I just want to say pump the brakes a little bit. They're not doing this against the NFC North, okay? I mean, let's just have some level of sanity here as we move forward. Let's continue on with everything that we've got going on. Tanner says 2018, Oklahoma came up short against an SEC defense. That's the difference. LSU is doing this to the SEC defenses. Okay. And Oklahoma also scored over 35 points and gained over, I believe, 500 yards, if I'm not mistaken, against that SEC defense. They shredded Georgia's defense in that year prior in the Rose Bowl. In fact, when you look at what Big 12 teams do on average against SEC teams in bowl games, what you will see is that Big 12 offenses tend to stay basically the same, and SEC defenses give way above their average, give up way above their average in terms of yards and points in those matchups. Again, like, this is a data argument. Like, the data supports my argument. And I'm not saying that the SEC is bad. The SEC is fantastic. I think they're the best conference in the country this year because of the top 5 teams who are really good. Really good. I'm just saying, like, the hyperbole about how good their defenses are on the whole is a little overblown. Okay, let's continue to go. Let's see. Eric says AAC should be number 5. ACC should be 6. I know the AAC is a group of 5, but it is top to bottom better than the ACC. No, it's not. One of the better teams from the AAC got beat by Pitt. Case closed. All right, we continue. And that was in response, by the way, to my ranking of conferences. And my ranking of conferences looked like this. I put SEC number 1, I put the Big Ten number 2, and I think there's a clear separation of those two up at the top. And really, it's kind of razor thin because I think Ohio State might be the best team in the country. There's depth in the Big Ten. There's depth at the top in the SEC. I think overall there's probably just a couple more right there at the top tier. You've got to go down more to like that 9 through 15 to get the next tier in the Big Ten. But razor thin right there. And then I went Pac-12 and then Big 12 and then the ACC. ACC is a clear 5th. Everyone was upset that I put the Pac-12 above the Big 12 this season. Again, I think it's razor thin. I think it becomes about really what you think about the top end of the conference. And when I looked at the top end of the conference, I think 1 through 10, you can basically throw out the bottom 2 teams in the Pac-12. If you just say, like, okay, apples to apples, 1 through 10, what is it? You can make a strong data argument that the 10 top teams in the Pac-12 are better than the 10 teams out of the Big 12. I always get the 10 teams in the Big 12. I mean, it's confusing. And then at the top end, I have Utah over Oklahoma. I have Oregon a little bit over Baylor. So that at the top end, so that's why I did what I did. Everyone's saying like it's so egregious. I don't think it's that egregious. I understand people whose conference, they want to base their entire college football narrative and perspective on conference. One, that's a failed way to view college football. That's number one. And number two, stop. Don't do that. Evaluate teams individually. Evaluate games individually. And try as best you can to not look at the entirety of the season, but pockets, because that's where you're going to see where teams will do in certain weeks. All right, let's continue. Apollo says, all right, who hacked Joel Klatt's Twitter? Who did it? There's no way in hell Joel Klatt gave the SEC credit for anything. I give the SEC credit all the time. Do I not? Do I not? Calling a spade does not mean that I hate any singular conference. I can tell you one thing right now. I am 0% on the take for any one conference. I really don't care. If the ACC is great that year, awesome. If the SEC is great that year, more power to them. If the Pac-12 has a great year, I'll tell you. I'd like to think that I will tell you regardless of affiliation. That's why I think the SEC is the best conference this year. Is it razor thin? Yeah, it's absolutely razor thin. Could the Big Ten beat them in bowl matchups this year and flip my rankings? Yep, absolutely. Why? Because I adjust based on games on the field. Let's continue. Let's see. Hunter says, and we'll end on this. 3 OSU players in the top 5 for your Heisman race. LOL. Biased much? No, I don't think I am biased, actually. And there's probably 3 Ohio State players in everybody's top 5 or 6 or 7. So, like, what are we talking about? Are they having good years or not, Hunter? Oh, they are? Then pound sand. I don't care what uniform you wear. You will get mentioned if you are a great player. Jonathan Taylor's Wisconsin team, they're probably not good enough to have a Heisman Trophy winner, but he's about to rush for 6,000 yards in his junior season. Not in one season, that would be a record. Through his junior season. Right? So I include him in that. J.K. Dobbins has been outstanding. Fields has been outstanding, taking care of the football except for the fumbles last week. Chase Young, clearly doing great things. Joe Burrow, clearly doing great things. Tyler Huntley's played great. Isaiah Simmons has played great. Trevor Lawrence in the back half of the season has played great. I don't care what uniform you play. If you produce on big stages and you're at the top end of college football, guess what? You'll get a mention. Bias. By the way, you seem to have a lovely wife. What was she thinking? Huh? Am I right? Am I right? Oh, all right. That's going to do it. That's going to do it from the fan interaction. Oh, I question her judgment. Let's get to performance of the week. There were several great performances this last week. There really were. Let's see. Namely, Jalen Hurts, those 28 carries to pull through against TCU. That was terrific. Keaton Slovis at USC was like bonkers. He went off against UCLA, and by the way, that helps Utah that USC won that game because now USC is staying in the rankings. USC is done for the year at this point until their bowl game, so they're kind of solidified in the rankings, which is going to help the Pac-12 and Utah potentially get that bump into the playoff if they need it. So that was a great performance. I don't want to leave out any other great performance, and no, I'm sorry, Mac Jones, you don't get one for playing really well against Western Carolina, although you did come in and play well against Western Carolina. My performer of the week is Superman and the Avengers. Boom! How do you like me now? Chase Young was absolutely incredible. A career-high 9 tackles. He had 3 sacks. He had all those tackles for loss of forced fumbles. And again, they happen at the biggest moments. When you look at the game and you look at when they need a play on a 3rd and long, 4th down, who shows up? Chase Young. He's Barry Bonds in 01, gets a fastball, bam, hits it out of the park. This is the most dominant player that I've ever seen, covered on a college football field. He's going to be the best player available in the draft. Doesn't mean he'll go number one, but he'll be the best player available in the draft. He is outstanding, and his performance last week is why he is still going to be in contention for the Heisman Trophy moving forward over the next couple of weeks. Heisman voters, do not vote until the end of the conference championship games. It's a disservice to Joe Burrow. It's a disservice to Chase Young. It's a disservice to the trophy to get your vote in now without seeing these guys play some of their best competition later in the year. If Joe Burrow goes off against Georgia, he's going to lock it up. If Chase Young goes off and Burrow doesn't play well against Georgia, there's a chance Young could actually overtake him and win the Heisman Trophy. Do the right thing. Hold your vote until next week after the conference championship games. Chase Young's sensational. His last 2 games have been top 15 matchups against Wisconsin and Penn State. Now he has another top 15 matchup against Michigan. He'll have another top 15 matchup against either Wisconsin or Minnesota. The stages are set for the most dominant player in college football to make a run at the most prestigious trophy in college football. And I can't wait to see it, because you know one thing, Gus and I will be there, Superman and the Avengers. Wait for it on Saturday, and it will arrive. I'm going to set Twitter on fire, and I can't wait. This has been Breaking the Huddle, brought to you by Dr. Pepper. It is the official drink of Fansville. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, everybody, and we will see you next week.